The sound of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's condescending laughter echoed through the packed arena, followed by a stunned, deafening silence from the thousands in attendance. Her voice dripping with disdain blared from the giant screens, unmistakable and chilling. President Trump stood at the podium, his expression unreadable as he let the recording play, his gaze fixed firmly on the camera and, through it, on the nation itself. The day had begun with a full-blown media blitz. AOC, her face a mask of passionate sincerity, was everywhere. From the plush armchair of a morning talk show, she unveiled what she called her masterpiece, the American Renewal Fund, declaring it the most significant anti-poverty legislation in a generation. She described it as a bold, sweeping plan to rebuild the nation's soul by taxing the ultra-wealthy and large corporations to fund social programs for the struggling masses. The president, she said, leaning into the camera, her voice polished and rehearsed, wants you to believe that protecting billionaires will somehow help your family. It's a tired old lie. My plan, the American Renewal Fund, isn't about protecting the powerful. It's about empowering you. It's about fighting for the little guy. Her social media exploded in a relentless storm of attacks, post after post, portraying President Donald Trump as a heartless oligarch, a Wall Street puppet deaf to the cries of everyday Americans. Her supporters hailed her as a modern-day Joan of Arc, a fearless warrior for the people. To them, she was the future, and Trump was the past. By midday, the narrative had solidified across the mainstream media. Oak was the bold new champion of the working class, and Trump the villain, holed up in the White House, plotting new ways to serve his wealthy friends. But inside the Oval Office, there was no panic-only quiet, calculated focus. Trump sat behind the resolute desk, not watching the news, but listening intently to a man who had risked everything to be there. The man, a mid-level Democratic aide, looked pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a plain, unmarked USB drive. He wasn't a political operative, but an accountanted man who had joined the party with the hope of doing good. "Mr. President," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I believe in helping people. I truly do. But this isn't that." He pushed the drive across the desk. "My father owns a small manufacturing business in Ohio. He has 32 employees there, like family to us. This renewal fund, it would destroy them. It would destroy everything my grandfather built. It's not about renewal, sir. It's about punishment." Then, he slid a folded piece of paper next to the drive. It was a handwritten letter. "I was at a fundraiser last night," he continued, his eyes filling with tears. "In a penthouse in Manhattan. I recorded it. You need to hear it. The American people need to hear it. They deserve to know who they're really dealing with." President Trump picked up the letter. It was from the aide's father, a simple, heartbreaking plea written on company letterhead, explaining how the new taxes would force him to fire his loyal employees and sell the very business his own father had started after returning home from the war. It was raw human truth in a city built on spin. It was raw truth in a city built on spin. Trump looked from the handwritten letter to the unmarked USB drive, his expression grim as he nodded slowly. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're a patriot." As the aide quietly left the room, a heavy sense of purpose settled over the Oval Office. The trap had been laid by his opponent, but now the key to dismantling it sat right on the president's desk. That evening, the energy at the rally was electric. A sea of red, white, and blue filled the arena as thousands of Americans gathered for the primetime event. They were farmers, small business owners, construction workers, and police officers, the very people AOC claimed to fight for, and the very people Trump had promised to protect. When he stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into a deafening roar. He smiled, waved, and let the applause roll over him. But when he approached the podium, He didn't lead with an attack, he began with a story. "I had a visitor at the White House today," he said, his voice calm but commanding as silence spread through the arena. "A good man, a young man working in Washington, who got into politics because he believed he could make a difference." Holding up a folded piece of paper, he continued, "He gave me this. It's a letter from his father, who runs a small manufacturing business in Ohio. Not a massive corporation, just a family business with 32 employees. This letter is about a new bill being pushed in Congress. They call it the American Renewal Fund." "They call it the American Renewal Fund," Trump said, his voice steady but rising with controlled passion. "And it's going to force this man to fire every single one of his employees." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't politics. This was personal. It was real. It was the kind of fear that kept them awake at night. "This father doesn't want a handout," Trump continued. "He just wants the government to get out of the way so he can provide for his family and the families who depend on him. But according to some people in Washington, that's not enough." The arena fell completely silent. The audience was hanging on every word, the air thick with tension. "The congresswoman who wrote this bill says it's about helping the little guy," Trump said, his tone shifting. "She says she's fighting for you, but I have to wonder, what does she really think about you? What does she say when she's not on TV? What does she say when she's behind closed doors? In a fancy Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by the same globalist billionaires she claims to despise." A sharp gasp swept through the arena. They could feel it coming. "I think," Trump said, leaning into the microphone, "it's time we all found out." With a subtle signal, the giant screens flanking the stage flickered to black. Then came the sound, the clinking of champagne glasses, the distant hum of a wealthy gathering, and, finally, a woman's voice, sharp and unmistakable, followed by a burst of laughter. It was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. "Honestly, the numbers are fantastic," she sneered, her voice dripping with arrogance. "The polling shows they're buying it completely. The whole underdog branding. Genius." A deep, sycophantic voice replied. "But Alexandria, the taxes. How do you sell such a massive hike to the middle class?" Then came the moment that would shatter her carefully crafted image. AOC's laughter dripping with arrogance and contempted code through the arena, like a slap. "You don't sell it to them," she said, her voice thick with mockery. "You tell them it's for their own good. They're so unevolved. They just don't understand the greater good we're creating. They're worried about their little paychecks, their little businesses. It's our job to think for them." A wave of shock surged through the crowd, so strong it felt physical. It was a collective, breathless realization. Jaws dropped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. A man in a Union t-shirt simply shook his head, his expression hollow with betrayal. The laughter on the recording struck like a punch to the gut, and when it ended, the arena fell into a haunting, deafening silence, the kind of silence that comes when your worst fears have just been spoken aloud. They had been called backward. They had been mocked. They had been dismissed as ignorant by the very person who claimed to speak for them. And into that silence, President Trump spoke not with triumph, but with ice in his voice. "Unevolved," he repeated, letting the word hang. "That's what she thinks of you, the men and women who build this country, who fight our wars, who raise our families. She thinks you need her to think for you." He held up the father's letter once more. "This man isn't unevolved, he's an American," Trump said, his voice firm and unwavering. "And he deserves a government that respects him, not one that mocks him behind his back." The crowd, once stunned into silence, now simmered with a low, rising growl of anger. Shock had turned into a slow-burning rage. Then, Trump's voice boomed with authority. "That's why today, I am signing an executive order, the Small Business Protection Act. It will use every tool at my disposal to shield America's family-owned businesses from these predatory, job-killing taxes. The arena erupted, not just in applause, but in a roar of relief, gratitude, and long-awaited vindication. The anger had found its release. Trump let the moment breathe, then raised his hand to quiet the crowd. His eyes locked onto the camera, blazing with intensity, not just addressing the arena, but the entire nation, and unmistakably, his now exposed opponent. "She wanted to take from your kitchen table to decorate hers," he said, his voice lowering to a cold, steely edge. "We heard you, Congresswoman Evan, when you thought the little people weren't listening." He paused, letting the silence settle before delivering the final blow. "In this country, the greater good is letting you keep what you've earned." The crowd exploded into thunderous, sustained applause, cheering not just for a policy, but for a president who had listened, who had acted, and who had stood between them and those who thought they were too small to matter. He hadn't just defended them, he had given them a voice. And in one unforgettable moment, he had exposed the breathtaking arrogance of those who sought to rule over them. So, what do you think was the most powerful weapon in this story? Was it the father's heartfelt letter, the damning secret recording, or the president's final, cutting words? Let us know in the comments, and, for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines, don't forget to subscribe.